Okay, so good morning everyone and welcome to today's webinar. We're very pleased to welcome our very own Richard Jones, who is the Head of Policy and Public Affairs here at IOSH. To introduce him to the session, we will also have Alison Hind, who is very much the driving force behind these webinars. I'll shortly hand you over to her, but just a few quick points to make you aware of before we get underway. Firstly, for those of you who haven't attended one of our IOSH webinars, I'm Ben Pollard and I take care of the technical aspects of these sessions. So any problems and I shall try to assist as best as I can. So how today is going to work then is that Richard will deliver his presentation for the first 30 minutes of the session. And then we shall have the second half, which will be opened up to the floor for questions. It's worth pointing out that during Richard's presentation, you will be able to ask questions in writing using the Q&A option, which can be found at the top left-hand corner of your screen. We can then look through these at the beginning of the Q&A before we go to verbal Q&A, and we'll go through any that have come in writing. Alternatively, if you'd rather wait, when we do the Q&A part, you will be able to ask your questions verbally, so you can do that as well. But I will go through how we're going to run that in a little while after the presentation. In the meantime, if you do have any pressing technical issues during the presentation, you can message me at any point using the chat option, which again you will also find at the top left-hand corner of your screen. So with all that said, I am going to hand you over to Alison so that she can just introduce the session. So Alison, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to say a few words about what we've been up to at IOSH Switzerland. So after the first webinar, it was very clear that people wanted to do more networking. So we have arranged our first face-to-face meeting. I'm sure you've seen some of the publicity. It's going to be at Bern University on the 15th of May. It's a full day session, so going from 10 o'clock till 3 o'clock. We have 3 speakers that have been chosen because they're experts in what they do, and these are current hot topics that they're going to talk about. So David Gold is going to talk about fire issues, particularly with regard to complacency when you hear a fire alarm, so actually getting people to respond more quickly. Then we have Christoph Weber, sorry, who is going to talk about travel safety, health and security. And then Lydie Lecoultre is going to talk about work-related stress. So 3 interesting topics. They will be quite interactive. There'll be breakout groups and a chance to ask questions. Of course, during the day, there's a lot of opportunities for networking, meeting each other for the first time, which is quite exciting. We are welcoming members and non-members from IOSH. You will get lots of CPD, so the professional development points on offer as a result of doing that. And luckily, we've been managing to make it free of charge. So please come along and please bring anyone who you think might be interested in this sort of topic and have an interest in Switzerland as well. Please register with me first. If you don't have my email address, then you can get it through IOSH. So that's the Bern Seminar. We've also set up a couple of networking groups through our WhatsApp group. I have 31 people in there at the moment, so that's working well. There's also a LinkedIn site that has 13 people, so working less well, but that's fine. What we're finding is it's quite an administrative type conversations that are going on. So how we organise the networks and the groups and the webinars and things. It'd be quite nice to make it more of a discussion platform. So we can have a look at this at Bern, maybe thinking about asking a question every month, and we can phrase it in quite a controversial way and then get discussion about that during the month and then move on to another question. So maybe something like that, just trying to make it a bit more interesting rather than just logistics. We've also been talking to other groups within Switzerland, particularly SGAH, which is the occupational health group. You might see that our webinar is listed on their web platform, and it's been great to get to know them a bit. We're hoping to work with other of the bodies that are in Switzerland too. Okay, so that's about it. Now I'd like to introduce Richard Jones. He is the Head of Policy and Public Affairs at IOSH. He has worked an enormous amount on the new ISO 45000 standard. So he has been representing IOSH on the committee 283, which was the formal way of developing it. So I'm sure he's I'm sure he can talk a bit about the frustrations and the successes, the highs and the lows, because as we know, it's been a very long road, the development. He also comes with lots of hands-on experience from standards, the quality, environment and health and safety, particularly from his work at Rolls-Royce. So I'd like to introduce Richard. Thank you for coming and talking to us today, Richard.
Thanks,
Okay.
Alison.
Right,
good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to be talking to you today about this very important new arrival, ISO 45001. We'll briefly take a look at the new standard, why it's needed, what's different about ISO 45001 and implications for the future. I'd like to start though with a quote about leaders. It was the management guru Tom Peters who said, "Good leaders don't create followers, they create more leaders." Now, I think this is a great starting point when thinking about health and safety management, which needs top management commitment and for them to ensure that health and safety leadership and competence is spread right across the organization. So why is it needed? Well, I think firstly, we need to consider the global toll of health and safety failures, which act as a stark reminder of why we must all do more to try and manage health and safety more effectively. These are the latest ILO figures. You may have seen these. Some big numbers here, but shockingly, 1 death every 12 seconds somewhere in the world because of work. And it's been estimated that work accidents and diseases cost the global economy around 4% of GDP. Now, that's an enormous amount. It's about $3 trillion US. Also, researchers have estimated that only around 10% of the working population in developing countries are effectively covered by health and safety management, or sort of health and safety regulation, sorry. So where there may be regulation in place, it's not enforced very well. But as we all know, a systematic management of health and safety, as well as having humanitarian benefits, also has many business benefits too, including supply chain reliability. Now, research has shown that good feelings about work have been linked with higher productivity and profitability in both customer and worker loyalty. So as well as reducing losses, it can help organizations build on the 3 R's we use, which is reputation, resilience, and results. So why is it needed? Just as a reminder, well, we clearly need to do something to tackle this global toll of health and safety failures. But also, OSAS 18001, although it's a well-used standard, was not an agreed international standard. Now, when I say well-used, a research by the OSAS group found that there were more than 90,000 certifications worldwide. That was in 2012. Their latest estimate is that in most places this is almost doubled. So a conservative estimate would put it at about 150,000 certifications today. But it's not a consensus-based standard. For those who you may know, it was developed by BSI with a couple of other national standards bodies, as well as some certification bodies. So it didn't have the rigor as true international standards. And of course, a big drawback was it doesn't align with the other international management system standards that exist now. while we're here, if I can get Ben to help, we'd like to run, as we go through this, a couple of instant polls. So the first one is, could you tell us how many of you if your organisation or those that you advise are currently certificated to OSAS 18001? Is that available, Ben? Okay, if you can just click. And also, if they are, could you tell us, are they considering migrating to ISO 45001? We hope to be able to share the results of this as we go through.
Yeah, of course. Just to step in, just to say that I can see that you are all putting your comments in. So hopefully you have all seen the poll that's come up on your screen. So if you'd like to just complete that, and then we can review them afterwards. You can carry on now, Richard. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. So why is an international standard required? Well, for ISO, now many of you will know if you've working for organisations with ISO 9001 or 14001, you may be familiar with the recent changes, but I'll just recap that. ISO over the years, as they developed more and more international management system standards, had identified a big challenge for themselves. They carried out a survey or an audit of their own systems in 2012, and they discovered that over the years they'd accumulated multiple definitions of some common terms. So, for example, they discovered that there were 328 different definitions for organization and about 145 different definitions for management systems. So clearly scope for standardizing the standard. So their solution to this was to introduce Annex SL. Now, Annex SL, the SL doesn't really stand for anything. It's part of the, if you like, the numbering system. It's one of the many annexes that are with the ISO directives that govern how they introduce management system standards. So if the annexes start at A, you can see how many annexes they have. But what Annex SL did is it introduced the same high-level structure for all new and revised international management system standards. That's the same clauses, titles, and sequences. So now all new and revised standards will have these same 10 clauses in the same sequence and the same titles. Now, you can't do anything to change them, but you can add to them. And you'll see on clause 5 on leadership, with 45001, we added and worker participation. Now, the worker participation isn't as critical to other management system standards as it is to health and safety, so we were justified in adding that. So as well as the same high-level structure, what's also happening is identical core text will be used in these standards. Obviously, there will be topic-specific variations, but it's estimated that around 40% of the core text in all new and revised standards will be identical, and there will be common terms and definitions used wherever possible. Now, again, topic variations will be needed. Now, the reason for this is to aim to reduce confusion and inconsistency across the standards. But importantly, it will enable organizations, particularly those with multiple certifications, to integrate this within their not necessarily integrate the management systems, which isn't a requirement, but certainly integrate it into their overall business processes and systems, which is now a requirement of all management system standards. So looking then at the progress for ISO, ISO has a 6-stage process in the development of international standards, and thankfully we're now at the 6th, the publication stage, and as you all know now, I hope, the publication was launched on the 12th of March this year, just over a month away. Now, IOSH's involvement in the development of this is when it was first approved back in 2013, we applied for and were successful in becoming a Category A liaison member of the ISO project committee, and as Alison says, that was PC283. This required quite a detailed application form, which was then voted on by all the PC283 members. So in effect, this means we were accepted as a global body by countries across the world as having a valuable contribution to make. So we were pleased to get that. Now, ISO members are all the national standards bodies around the world. They're all eligible to join any project committee that's set up. And for PC283, by the end of the process, we had 70 what's called participating members. These take full action within it and have voting rights. But there are also 16 observing countries. These are countries who just choose to be an observing member. So they can attend the meetings, but they don't have voting rights, as well as 21 liaison bodies like IOSH. And this has included some other prominent organizations such as the ILO, the IOE, the Institute of the International Organization for Employers, and ITUC, the International Trade Union Confederation. Now, as a liaison body, IOSH received all the papers to comment on and attended all the meetings because we were a full participating member of the work group that was set up. When a project committee is established, the first thing they do is set up a work group to do the work, as the name suggests. Now that the standard is published, PC283 has been disbanded and a new technical committee will be established. Whether it's called TC283 remains to be seen, but this will oversee the monitoring and maintenance and review of ISO 45001 as we go forward. As some of you may know, international standards have to be reviewed at least or within 5 years of being devised. And of course, it will deal with any other related standards, and there is already a work package being mooted for a standard on psychosocial risk. So we'll keep you posted on any developments there. So just briefly to outline the aim of 45001, importantly to minimize the health and safety risk to all of those working on behalf of an organization. And so it extends beyond their immediate employees. And it includes, importantly, it includes both mental and physical health. It obviously provides a mechanism for integrating health and safety within the management system processes of the organization, and provides a platform for continually improving the health and safety performance of the organization. So what does it look like? Well, for those of you who are familiar with OSAS 18001 or HSG 65 for that matter, there will be no big surprises. It follows the Plan, Do, Check, Act model. It's a risk-based system. The main difference is the Annex SL structure. So if I go into, this is my version, my animated version of the diagram that appears in the standard. And as we said, it's a Plan, Do, Check, Act model. The first, for those of you who can remember the list of clauses that I put up, the first three clauses, clause 1 is scope, clause 2 is normative references, and clause 3 is terms and definitions. Now, I haven't got time to go through all of those this time, but I just would say that the first requirements start at clause 4, but don't ignore clause 3, the terms and definitions. It's very important that you read them in conjunction with the rest of the standard, because they inform how it should be interpreted and are quite crucial. So the first requirement standard, as I said, is clause 4, which is the context of the organization. Now this is new, and I'll say more about this in a while. It includes taking account of the scope of the management system standard, any internal and external factors that can affect the organisation, and also the needs and expectations of interested parties. Now, interested parties is ISO speak for stakeholders. But central to the whole standard is clause 5, which is leadership and worker participation. And this is about leadership commitment, establishing the policy for the organisation, and also establishing the roles, responsibilities, accountabilities and authorities within the management system, and importantly ensuring that there are mechanisms in place for effective worker participation and consultation at all stages of the management system. The next clause is clause 6, which is another important clause. You'll all be familiar with the old adage, fail to plan and you plan to fail. So it really is important. This is where the setting of the occupational health and safety objectives takes place, and also establishing those actions that are needed to achieve them. So this is important. This is where all the risk assessment processes are established. Clauses 7 and 8. Clause 7 is support, which is about ensuring adequate resources, adequate occupational health and safety competence right across the organisation, that there are good levels of awareness about the management system standard, and that there are communication channels in place, as well as documented information. Now, I'll come back to documented information in a few minutes. Clause 8 is operation. This is life at the sharp end, if you like. This is operational planning and action, and it includes things like the management of change, and also 3 new important subclauses on procurement, outsourcing and contractors, as well as the usual things on emergency preparedness, etc. Clause 9 is the performance evaluation. This is where all the monitoring and measuring takes place. This includes internal audit, as well as the all-important management review. And clause 10 is improvement, which is the continual improvement cycle. This now includes the setting of targets to achieve improvement. For a health and safety point of view, this is where investigation of incidents and other non-conformances will take place, and also the taking of corrective actions. So that will hopefully deliver the intended outcomes of the occupational health and safety management system, which effectively are to prevent injury, illness and death, and to ensure there is a safe and healthy working environment. There is also with this standard an annex, just the one annex, Annex A, which is an informative annex. So it just provides a little bit more guidance on the use of ISO 45001. It explains in a bit more detail the various clauses. It's not a how-to guide on how to implement a management system standard, but I'm sure that most, like BSI in the UK, most of the national standards bodies will be doing their own thing. For example, BSI has published at the same time their own guidance, BS 45002, which is an implementation guide. They'll also, over the course of this year, be providing shorter guides to supplement those on subjects such as occupational health, risk management and accident investigation. So it's worth, wherever you're based, it's worth checking with your local national standards body whether they're doing something as well. Of course, the national standards bodies aren't the only source of information on this. For example, IOSH has a lot of information on the website. I'll come back to that later. The Chartered Quality Institute has produced a very useful guide, and we've been able to negotiate a 25% discount for members on this. You may have seen an item in IOSH Connect on the 12th of March. The Trade Union Congress in the UK has produced a guide for health and safety reps, and the Health and Safety Executive apparently is working on something on proportionate application of ISO 45001. So that's a whistle-stop tour of what the standard actually contains and looks like. So how does it differ from OSAS 18001? Well, as I said, it'll be very familiar to most people, and those organisations with a good, mature management system standard under OSAS 18001 will be well on their way to achieving certification on 45001. But there are some significant and important differences and improvements, I'd have to say. Now, we've mentioned all of these before, but just a little bit more detail. The context of the organisation, which is the first new element. This means that there needs to be consideration of the wider issues, such as the organisation's supply chain or the communities in which it operates, but also wider issues such as the cultural, social and political, the legal, technological and economic environment in which the organisation operates, as well as some key internal factors such as the governance of the organisation, its structure, etc. These all need to be taken into account, and those of you with experience of carrying out steeple or pestle analysis, these sort of techniques will come in very handy going forward. The next is leadership. Now, I can't emphasize enough how important this clause is on leadership. Top management, as the standard describes leaders, are those who control and direct the organization, or that part of the organization that's within the scope of the management system. For those of you familiar with international standards, you know the organization can set the scope for certification purposes. And so if the top management are those who can take decisions that affect that, if they have to refer up to another part of the organization, then it's the leadership level at that level become the top management. But it's also not only the context, it's not only determining the context of the organization, but leaders now all managers need to take an active and be seen to be taking an active role in the management system standard, setting the direction for the organization, fostering trust, promoting a positive culture, and communicating not only what needs to be done, but why it's important. I'll say a bit more about leadership in a bit more detail later on. The third new phase is documented information. Now, this is a subtle but important difference. The term documented information is used throughout the standard now. Importantly, the new and revised international standards no longer refer to documentation, records or documented procedures. This is recognizing that we live in a digital age and information is processed and stored in all manner of ways. So auditors, for example, can no longer demand to see a paper copy of a procedure. They can just ask to see documented information, and it's for the organization to determine how it manages that documented information. So it doesn't have to be written procedures. The organization can choose to have a paper-based system if it wants, that's fine, but it can also use a video or audio tapes or photographs as part of its documented information. And auditors will need to get used to seeing documented information on iPhones, on iPads, notepads, notebooks, PCs, laptops, you name it, and it's up for the organization to determine that. There's lots of other things that are familiar to us, but there is much greater emphasis on this in the new standard. So worker participation. Now, this is crucial. This is why we, in the project committee, we linked it to leadership, because it's leadership's responsibility to ensure that there is non-managerial participation throughout, and that they support leadership and contribution to others, which takes me back to the quote I made from Tom Peters earlier about developing, creating more leaders. Continual improvement, which is a very familiar part of management systems. There is now a requirement for continual improvement objectives to be set, and for processes to be established for achieving it. So it's a bit more rigorous than previous standards. Hierarchy of control we'll all be familiar with. There is much greater emphasis on applying the hierarchy of control at the planning, clause 6, and operational stages, clause 8, so that problems can be designed out at the earliest possible stage. Risk management, there is now a requirement for ongoing assessment of risks and opportunities. Now, this means not only looking at the risks associated, health and safety risks, but also risks and opportunities for the management system itself. So anything that can be detrimental or can enhance how the management system operates need to be regularly assessed. Compliance status, this requires a process to be in place to ensure that all legal and other requirements are taken into account, that they're kept up to date, and that the compliance status is regularly checked. So when auditors come to audit, they don't carry out a compliance check as such, but they will want to see that there are processes in place for regularly checking that legal compliance is being achieved. Supply chain, this is going back to these 3 new clauses I mentioned earlier about procurement, outsourcing and contractors. It recognises that there's a massive growth in this, as we become a more globalised world. There is a requirement for specific processes to safely manage these. And if you remember the point I made earlier about researchers estimating that only about 10% of the working population in developing countries effectively covered by health and safety regulation, this has the potential to help raise the bar quite considerably worldwide. And if you like, it's a way of ensuring that the management system or the risk management of the organization is extended as far into its supply chain as the organization has control or influence. Finally, KPIs or performance evaluation. Again, criteria has to be set against which evaluation can take place, not only about the health and safety performance, but the performance and the efficacy of the management system itself. So we need to, ensure that there are processes in place for this. So in terms of making it happen, as I just recapping then, it arrived on the 12th of March 2018. There was overwhelming support from the members of PC 283. About 93% voted in favour. Importantly, from the 12th of March, OSAS 18001 is now withdrawn. It doesn't disappear for good. There is what's called a 3-year migration period. So those organisations who are currently certificated to OSAS 18001 who wish to migrate to 45001 will have up to 3 years to do that, and this will very much depend on their certification cycle. And I'm sure for those who have certification, their accreditation bodies will have already been in touch with them. For those who haven't currently got any certification, they need to make that decision, and they'll need to look at how they understand what the requirements of 45,001, do a gap analysis to identify any gaps in their system, and again, at some point they will need to engage a certification body, and certification bodies can help with this. I think it must also be said that, as with all international management system standards, they are voluntary. So it's not compulsory that organizations become certificated to it. Organizations can choose to adopt the principles of ISO 45001 without necessarily going for certification. And in the standard itself, it actually says, it highlights about 4 different ways organizations can demonstrate conformity. One being that they can not certify, self-declare. They can use a third-party auditor who's not a certification body to independently verify, or they can use their customers to come in and audit them, or they can take the step for certification and use an accreditation body. So what to do next? Well, I think if you're considering moving towards 45,001, now's the time to start raising awareness, not only of the changes that might affect the organization, but also the benefits of the new system. Absolutely crucial to this is to secure commitment from top management. I can't express how important this is. If you haven't got absolute commitment from top management, then you're not on the starting blocks as far as 45,001 is concerned. There's also the opportunity to upskill people as required. Now, I think there are 2 key groups here who may need upskilling: health and safety professionals and top management themselves. Now, I think there's a great opportunity here for health and safety professionals to take a leadership role within their organizations, depending on the structure and where they are in it, of course. But there's an opportunity to help the CEOs and other senior managers to understand what the management system is all about, crucially to understand their roles and responsibilities within it, to help them assess the context of the organization, those internal and external factors. This may include engaging in things like horizon scanning, stakeholder engagement, but importantly, preparing top management to be audited to the new standard, preparing them so that they can demonstrate their leadership, that they're integrating it into the overall business processes. There's an important difference between OSAS 18001 and 45001. OSAS 18001 allowed organizations to nominate a management representative. That's not the case with 45,001. So auditors can and probably will audit anybody in the organization, and that will include CEOs and board directors of multinationals who may never have been audited to this sort of thing before, so may need some coaching in order to help them deal with that. The other group, of course, is auditors, and this includes both internal auditors as well as third-party external auditors. They may require new skills, particularly interpersonal skills. Some of them may never have had to interview a CEO or board director of a multinational before, so they need to be able to speak the right language. IRCA, the International Register of Certificated Auditors, has mandated 1.5 days training for those auditors who are currently certificated to OSAS 18001 who want to transfer to 45,001. So overall, I think this is a fantastic opportunity to help ensure that health and safety gets the strategic attention, the leadership, and the resources it deserves. And it's one that we should seize with both hands. So just to conclude then, essentially 45,001 will help businesses well, to deliver the people, planet, the health and safety element of the people, planet, profit, or the famous triple bottom line, but also help organisations to reap the many benefits of effective risk management, preventing injury, illness and death, and achieving improved reputation, resilience and results. Now, before I finish, if I can just mention the new ISO 45001 web pages. I think there was a link to this in the IOSH Connect of the 12th of March. Here you can find lots of free resources, including frequently asked questions, tips on getting started, the IOSH briefing, which has been updated, and also, you'd need to log in to the MyIOSH portal to access this. Now, we'll be keeping this updated with developments, including when new webinars are being organised, also developing case studies. We have one from an early adopter at the moment. And I would put out a plea to everybody, if your organisation is considering going for this and you want to work with us to produce a case study on how your journey went, there is an easy to use template for case studies on the IOSH web pages. You just fill that in and send it to me, and we'll get in touch with you and help you do this. The final thing, and it's not one of the polls, but if I thought it would be interesting if you were able to let us know what you think the key benefits and challenges of ISO 45001 are. Don't expect to do it on an instant poll now, but there'll be an email address come up anytime now. There you go. If you could answer this, it's not compulsory, obviously, and send me those, what you think are the benefits and challenges, and we'll summarise them and share them with the group at a later stage. So that's it from me. Thanks for your attention. I'm happy to take as many questions as you have now. Excellent.
Okay, brilliant. So there weren't actually any written questions, I think partly because I think most of you are obviously looking forward to submitting some verbal questions. So what I'm going to do is, in fact, a written question has just come through. So Richard, the first question here is, do you know offices for health, safety and security that are certified by ISO 45001, especially from universities?
As far as I know, there'll be no health and safety officers certified by ISO itself. It's for organisations such as IOSH really to certify their members, but we don't have any certification process for this. If they are auditors, for example, internal or external auditors, they can become certified by IRCA or other such bodies. I think that's it.
There's another question that has also come in as well. So this person has said, is there already some experience return on feedback by organisations who have implemented ISO 45001 so far?
Not yet. It's very early days. I understand there are a number of them have achieved conformity, but they won't yet have got their certification because the national accreditation services in the different countries couldn't really certificate the accreditation bodies until the standard was actually published. So I know, for example, in the UK, where there are a lot of certification bodies, UCAS, the UK Accreditation Service, won't be finalising the certification of those bodies until April. I think that's probably done now. but I know a lot of the accreditation bodies have been working with their clients and they've already audited them against the standard, so they're just waiting to get their approval so that they can actually issue certificates. But I'm not aware that there is any feedback from organisations certificated. That's one of the reasons that IOSH is trying to reach out to organisations to develop case studies, so that we can get some sort of idea about the sort of, you know, the challenges that were faced by organisations and how they overcame them.
Okay, great. We're just going to ask one more question that's come through. We're just going to quickly ask that one, and then we will actually open this up and we'll go through to some verbal questions. So if you have put a written answer question in, we can review that shortly. This person has asked, Richard, can you say something more about expectations for extending the scope of IOSH SMS upstream and downstream of an organisation's own direct operations?
The scope of the management system, or that management system that's certificated, will be up for the organisation to determine. But it's stated very clearly in ISO 45001 that in establishing the scope for certification purposes, organisations shouldn't seek to hide any parts of their organisation that might be, in inverted commas, difficult to manage, so they can't hide their hazardous bits. If auditors find that that's happening, then that won't go well. Having said that, in terms of the outsourcing activities, if an organisation outsources some of its processes, then it depends on the level of control that the organisation will have, but it will, the management system standard will deem those processes to be almost part of the organisation's management system standard. It must be included to help it achieve the intended outcomes of its management system standard. So, for example, if an organisation was outsourcing a very specialized process that required specialist equipment and specialized knowledge, then their level of control would be much less than if it was just a normal process that they would be expected to have knowledge of. So it's sort of difficult to say. It depends on the nature of the processes involved.
Okay, great. So we'll leave it there for the written questions for now, and we can move on to the verbal side of things. Before I do, I'd just say that if you're playing a recorded version of this, this is actually where the session will end. So thank you very much for watching and listening, and we hope that you found it informative. Take care. Thank you very much.